Well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started because sometimes we do have problems with that computer in the classroom. All right, so talking about the listing agreement, buyer's agents agreement. So again, not a dot loop class, but where you're going to find them is in the templates in the KW. Oh, kicked me off. Hold on just a second. So you're going to find those in the templates and the KWKC Metro forms. They're kind of written in code a little bit, but the what you're looking for is the KWKC Metro Exclusive Buyer Agency and the KWKC Metro Exclusive Right to Sell. We call them listing agreements, buyer agency agreements, but the actual names of them are the Exclusive Buyer Agency and the Exclusive Right to Sell. Those you'll see those abbreviated, and in fact, they're abbreviated on down here. The EBA is the exclusive buyer agency. The ERTS is the exclusive right to sell. We're not going to talk about the change forms today, but just uh, the actual documents themselves and everything that all of the new ones are already uploaded for you, and the old ones have been taken out. Anything that an older version that we're not using anymore has been taken out of here, so you don't have to worry about that. There's a little more confusion on the KCRAR forms, I think. But so exclusive buyer agency and exclusive right to sell are the two forms that you're looking for. And then I'll get back to my loops and pull up. Hold on. All right. Still nobody showing up here. Hmm. Okay, so let's talk about because I think that most of you start out working with buyers. That's kind of where we are. All of our trainings tell us that listings are leverage, which is very true. We think that we need to, if we have a listing, the expectation is we get one or two buyers from that listing as well as the sale from that listing. So listings are leverage, but I think most new agents, I think, start out working with the buyer. So that's usually where I start here on the trainings. So in the buyer documents, remember in your buyer loop, there are certain things that I expect to see in there. We need, of course, the exclusive buyer agency agreement. And I also want to point out here that if you're working with a buyer that does not want to sign an exclusive buyer agency agreement, we have other options for you and for them. It's just you have to have something in writing with some kind of agreement with the buyer before you can ever go show a property through our MLS. That's our agreement now with MLS. So if you've got a buyer that's really hesitant, doesn't want to get locked in with you, talk to your coach and talk to me, and we will let you and that customer know what their options are, because we do have other options. Of course, the best thing, here we go. We've got people in the waiting room now. Tyler. All right. I should be getting live. So I don't know who all's joining. Log. I'm gonna stop share here for just a second. Morning, Tyler. And see if the classroom logs on. There it is. All right, who all's in the classroom with me this morning? Oh, they got muted. All right. Well, so for all of you, I've already apologized to everyone that joined me here on Zoom. I apologize for the confusion this morning. Completely my fault. We're about halfway through time-wise where we should be, and so we're going to be doing a really abbreviated version of the buyer agency agreement and the listing agreement. And so I'll get back to sharing my screen. So we're talking about first the buyer agency agreement, and that is the form we're going to be talking about. What I was just saying was that there are other options in case the buyer doesn't necessarily want to be locked in, and there are some buyers out there that are hesitant to do that. I understand that. So, but we're going to talk about the buyer agency agreement. And oh, there's everybody. Who all is in the classroom with me?
It's Douglas. Say your names, guys. Mitzi.
Chris. Tyler.
Douglas
Can you hear
Mitzi.
us?
Douglas Mitzi and who?
Chris and Tyler.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, very good. Well, again, I really apologize for the confusion this morning. Holiday, so I didn't think we were having class, and of course I didn't look at the schedule. So we're doing the buyer agency agreement is where we're starting here, and I was going to be doing a really abbreviated version of this and the listing agreement. Usually in this class, I try to go through kind of the details of it and the fact that you need to have a conversation with your buyers and sellers when you're having them sign these agreements. We never have anybody sign anything that we don't discuss with them. But we're not going to have time to go through all of that this morning. We're going to go through the mechanics of writing them out today. So, but in your buyer in your buyer loop, the things that we expect to see in your buyer agency agreement, I'm sorry, in your buyer loop sent out loop. So the buyer agency agreement, the exclusive buyer agency agreement is the one that you're going to be using 99.9% of the time. So that's what we want there. The other things that are required by the brokerage, the affiliated business disclosure, that's the form that lets the public know, the public that we're working with know that we have business relation. Oh, there's everybody. All right. Oh no, turn that camera back on because nobody on Zoom ever turns their camera on for me.
Working, it's processing.
Okay, all right, thanks. So the affiliated business disclosure, there we go. There's everybody. Hi, Yvette. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Yvette. All right. So again, really, I'm very sorry for the confusion this morning.
All right.
We're gonna get, it's really difficult for me to hear you all. So when you're talking in that group setting, make sure that you're talking slowly. You get my attention and you're talking slowly because there's a lot of lag time in there. So, okay, so the exclusive buyer agency, the affiliated business disclosure, we also require the KC Metro inspection advisory and resources document. That's a 2-page document. For those of you that haven't looked at it, this is telling the buyers how important it is to have inspections. We always try to convince. Most buyers are fine doing their inspections and understand the importance, but there are some people and some situations in which the buyers sometimes are hesitant to do their own inspections. It's especially if there was an inspection uh, report available from a previous buyer, house that was under contract and then came back on the market. But it's very important for a buyer to have their own inspections done. They don't have any recourse to a previous inspector in case something should come up later. So I know it's expensive. I know it's an expense, and some buyers think, well, if it's already been done, why do I need to pay for that myself? But it really, really is important. Each inspector has their own little hot buttons and the things that they will point, and they're all good. I'm not saying that, but each one has their strength. Most inspectors come from some different aspect of the business, and so one inspector is maybe a little more knowledgeable about foundation things in general. One might be a little more knowledgeable about electrical or plumbing. And so they each have their own little hot buttons. And so every inspection report is going to be different. So we really want our buyers to have their own. And so this inspection advisory, number one, lets them know how important that is for them to do their own. It kind of has a little bit of a breakdown of some of the more common inspections that you would see. And then the last page, and this is something that you all can customize for your own business. We have here listed the service providers that we work with. You like turning up the volume or something there. But you can customize this and put your own service providers in there as well. And as many different specialty inspectors as you like there. And so we do require that our buyers sign this. Okay, all right. See, there's a lot of lag time there. Suddenly you back in your seat. All right. And I prefer to see the cyber protection notice in there. It's in the contract and it's in our buyer agency agreements, but again, don't ever have anybody sign anything that you don't discuss. But one of the things that you definitely need to have a conversation with them about is the fact that they are very much at risk because of cyber hackers out there. Title companies get hacked, loan companies get hacked, you might get hacked. And so make sure that you have the conversation with your buyers and sellers to never, ever, ever give personal or financial information through an email that's been requested, even if it looks like it's official, because those hackers out there have gotten very, very sophisticated. And so always double check. Oh, well, and here comes Serena here too. So always double check or have your people double check, and you should too. Double check anytime that personal or financial information is requested through an email. We would all much rather, and that includes your lenders and your title companies, would much rather answer 50 phone calls a day to verify that an email is asking for information or that it was a legitimate email than to have anyone be the victim of some kind of nefarious activity out there. Good morning, Serena. So major confusion on Linda's part this morning, so we're getting started a little bit late. Going to be doing a very abbreviated buyer agency agreement and listing agreement here. And so back here in our buyer stock. So buyer agency agreement, the affiliated business disclosure, the inspection advisory, the cyber protection. And my suggestion is for all of you, regardless of what your buyer tells you, whether they say, well, no, I'm going to be looking in Missouri only. I'm not going to buy anything over there in Kansas. Got other people kind of filtering in this morning too. Here comes Alex. I suggest that you always put in the EPA lead-based paint brochure, because even if someone tells you they're looking for new construction, they may find a rehabbed house that fits all of their needs that was built in 1968. And so you would need to have that EPA lead-based paint brochure in your file, that you have shared that with them. That's a federal requirement. Huge fine if you haven't done that. And if they're signing the lead-based paint disclosure that the sellers provided, saying that they've received that brochure, you better make darn sure that they've received that brochure. So the easiest way that I think to do that is just to put it in every buyer folder, every buyer loop, and share it with them regardless of what they tell you they want to buy. Same thing with where I kind of started and jumped the track there for a minute. Same thing with whether which side of the state line they want to be looking on. There is absolutely nothing wrong with sending them both the Kansas brokerage disclosure form and the Missouri brokerage disclosure form, because you will find, and it will happen to you, I guarantee you, that you'll have that buyer that says, nope, no way, I'm going to be looking in Kansas. And then the perfect property comes up over in Kansas and they will buy it. And once again, that is it's a state requirement that is given to again, it's either buyer or seller, but right now we're talking about buyers. At the first time that you have any kind of substantial conversation with them, gathering personal information or financial information. So once again, just to cover yourself, send both of the brokerage disclosure forms from both sides of state line. I do like to see the pre-approval right as you are starting that loop, the pre-approval or proof of funds. I know sometimes we start the loop before, when we're having the consultation with them, and I understand that, that's fine, but I don't want you out there showing properties until you get that pre-approval or proof of funds from your buyer. That's a waste of everybody's time and a very heartbreaking situation if the buyer tells you, well, yeah, we can look up to 400, and then so you show them a $400,000 house, and then the pre-approval letter comes in later and they're pre-approved for a 375. They're never going to find another house that looked like that $400,000 house that they fell in love with in their price range. So don't go show properties until you have the pre-approval in hand and therefore in your loop, because everything that you have in hand should be in your loop. I also, then along with that, you're having a conversation. So once you have that pre-approval letter, you're having a conversation with that lender. The pre-approval letters should give you most of the information that you need, but some are very, very cryptic. Some give you everything that you will need to write an offer for that buyer, but some don't. So you have to have a conversation with that lender. You need to talk about it. The pre-approval letter may or may not show at what interest rate this pre-approval was written. Talk with the lender about whether that buyer can buy at a higher interest rate than that, because when interest rates go up, that affects the qualifications for that buyer. They may or may not qualify for that 350 at a higher interest rate. So have that conversation with them. Make sure you are very clear on what type of loan the buyer is getting, whether it's a conventional FHA, VA, USDA, or some lenders out there right now are having lender assisted down payment programs, which is kind of a mix of the two. It's kind of a hybrid between an FHA and conventional, sometimes with a secondary loan in there. So make sure you are absolutely clear on what kind of financing the buyer's getting, and that you're clear on what their down payment is. Whether it's a 20% conventional, 3.5% FHA minimum. Some FHA buyers put down more than the minimum. So make sure that you are clear on all of those kinds of things. Also talk with the lender to see if they have or can provide to you and to the buyer a good faith estimate of what their closing costs would be and what the payment would be based upon that pre-approval, and probably at the max on that pre-approval. Because a couple of different reasons for that. Number one, that's going to help you when you are doing the mandated buyer's estimated closing costs. If you have that particular lender's cost to be working with, because lenders, again, are all over the board on what they charge and what they call their charges on their good faith estimates or their original estimates, closing cost estimates. So that'll give you a head start on your estimated closing costs that you have to give them. I'd like for you to have done an estimate. It's not mandated. This is just Linda being the coach. That I like for you to see. I like to see an initial buyer's estimated closing costs in the folder, just so that we are clear that the buyer knows that there are costs to getting a loan over and above what their down payment is. And I kind of question whether you're going to be able to write the offer um, completely and accurately if you don't know whether the buyer needs help with those closing costs from the seller. So giving the buyer a really good idea, and again, it's an estimate of what the closing cost, generally what their closing costs are going to be, will give you an idea. You need to have that conversation with the buyer. So it appears that your closing costs are going to be about $5,200 over and above your down payment. Do you have that, or is that something we're going to need to ask the seller to participate in the contract? You won't know to do that in the offer unless you've done this work ahead of time, or at least have gotten that. Even if you don't prepare one, you've at least gotten one from the lender. I'm sure there are other things you're supposed to be asking the lender, and I don't have my list in front of me right now. But at that conversation, and then again, if it's a lender that you're not familiar with, that you have not worked with in the past, this may be someone that you are going to put on your list at some future date. So just have a conversation with them about the different products that they offer. You know, maybe this is a conventional buyer, but that lender may have other products that they could offer to other buyers for you in the future. Okay, so that's then the complete buyer's loop that I hope to see. And for those of you that are participating, which should be all of you, in the contract challenge, I expect to see a full buyer loop in the contract challenge as well. So I send you again, it's a very basic pre-approval letter, and then I do have a couple of cash offers out there too, so proof of funds with that. So let me talk about proof of funds for just a minute. The contract says that we don't have to provide that with the offer until after we have an effective offer, and there's the default of 5 days within the contract, and that of course everything's negotiable in there. But you should have the proof of funds in your folder again before you are out showing properties, so that you know at what price range that buyer can buy. Proof of funds can be either a bank statement, and we need to have the buyer's name still visible on that. But of course, we can white out the account number. And not only can, but we really should. We don't want that account number out there floating around, but it has to show how much money is in the account and with the buyer's name on it. So that's acceptable as proof of funds. Two other, either a letter from a bank officer, and we don't have to, in that situation, we don't have to have the exact amount of money stated in that letter. If you are showing properties up to 400,000 and that buyer has at least 400,000 in the account, the letter can state that the buyer has enough funds to meet the obligations of the contract. You know, because there might be a range of pricing that you're showing out there, so we don't have to give an actual number in the letter that comes from the bank officer. Another acceptable form of proof of funds would be a letter from a finance manager of some kind, but then kind of a double requirement on that one. Same thing, that all it does is have to state that the buyer has enough funds to meet the obligations of the contract. And if it's a finance manager for some kind of retirement account or something, we have to know how accessible that money is, when that money can be ready to make the purchase. We don't want to write a 12-day closing contract thinking we have cash, but it's going to take 45 days to get the money out of that account. We run into that situation, so that the money's available, that they have enough to meet the obligations of the contract, and when that money can be accessed. So, all right. Everything that we have to have in our loop here to make Linda happy and your coach, since I've got a coach here joining us here this morning. So, all right. So we're going to talk real briefly about the exclusive buyer agency agreement. So, and again, just the mechanics of it, because I don't have a lot of time to get into the detail. There is on Digital Chalk, there will be a previous video of the exclusive buyer agency and listing agreements where I talk about the paragraphs. So go watch that if you haven't. I really, not only do I expect everyone to see that, and again, I'm sorry that it's so short this morning. That's completely my fault on me. But I do expect you to read these agreements as well. Don't just go over what Linda says, because I don't read every word of these agreements out loud to you in these classes, and that doesn't happen in any of them. We expect you to know exactly what it says. And I think that, and I, as an experienced agent, I do this myself. Have a cheat sheet that you have made. It wouldn't do you any good for me to make this particular cheat sheet, but take the exclusive buyer agency agreement, you read it, and by the side of every paragraph, you write your little thumbnail explanation of what that paragraph is saying, so that you can have, again, don't ever have a client or customer sign anything that you haven't had a discussion with. I know agents do it all the time. They just send it, send it through .loop and say, here, sign this, without having that discussion. Please, please, please don't do that. I know that David's been talking over the last month or so about the importance of doing the estimated net sheet for seller and the estimated closing costs for buyer, because they don't understand some of these costs, and the lawsuits that have come up. Lawsuits come up because buyers and sellers didn't know that something was in the contract. So protect yourself and protect your client and or customer by having the conversation with them. Don't just send them something and say, here, sign this. And make sure that when you do send it, it is completely filled out. We never, ever, ever ask anyone to sign something that is not completed. And that means your signature, because you sign everything before you send it to them as well. So take one of these, read it, and write your little thumbnail explanation out to the side so that you can have that conversation with your buyer here. So the mechanics of writing this out. So we identify our buyers here on line 2, and you will see that at the end of that line, it does say indicate marital status. This is a contract. This is a contract between the brokerage, because remember, everything you do in your broker's name, and that client. And so it's a contract. We have to have their marital status. 2 reasons for that. We need to make sure that all buyers are represented, and the signatures that we will need on the contract. If you're having it, if it's just one party of 2 that's going to be on the contract, and I know that there are times that happens. If one of them has a really bad credit score, they don't want them on the contract, or they don't want them on the loan. That doesn't mean they can't be on the contract. Now, some lenders will give you a little bit of kickback on that. Or I shouldn't say kickback, well, it gave you a little pushback on that, because kickbacks are illegal, right? We all know that. A little pushback on that, but that doesn't mean they can't be in our agreement, because you don't want, once again, if you can't be giving your advice and counsel to someone that you're not representing. And if that buyer is not named on the buyer agency agreement, you are not representing them. So advice and counsel, anytime you're giving advice and counsel, we need them on the buyer agency agreement. Some of those other options that I talked about earlier are not agency agreements, or not exclusive agency agreements. And so you don't know whether you should be giving them advice and counsel or not on some of those. So that's why we use the EBA, exclusive buyer agency, 99.9% of the time here. But indicate their marital status. And here is the best time. You may know them as Bob and Betty Buyer, but here's the best time for you to collect and ask them how they want to be on the deed, how they want their names reflected on the deed. You know them as Bob and Betty. It might be Robert and Elizabeth, and see if Robert and or Elizabeth have a middle initial that they want to use, or some kind of suffix like junior, senior, second, or third, something along those lines. Make sure that this is the best time to collect that information because that's how you're going to be writing the offer. The title company takes whatever's on the contract and transfers that to the deed. So make sure that that's clear. You also may have situations where you have a buyer that's an LLC. We don't necessarily need the LLC paperwork. It's great if we have it, but the title company is going to need it, so you might as well collect it here. Two things that the paperwork of the LLC tells us is number one, that it really is a legitimate LLC, the articles of organization in there, and then also that the buyer that we're dealing with is the authorized signator of that LLC. That's important information for us to have. Can cause problems for us later on if all of that's not in place. So so identifying the buyer here is not just a matter of putting their names in. There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind that. The type of property that the buyer wishes to purchase. So it's my preference here that you only choose one. If you are looking with this buyer for an owner occupied property, then you would choose residential. If they say, well, but we're also looking for, an income producing property. We're moving, but, we're going to have some extra cash from the sale of our previous house. We're going to be looking for an income producing property, again, a rental property. I prefer that you have a separate agreement for that. That would indicate they are looking for an income producing property. Or if you start working with this buyer as a owner occupant, and then you again are reminding them of all of the services that either you or the brokerage can offer, and they say, well, yeah, you know what, my company is also looking for commercial property. Even though they're all listed here, I prefer that you use only one on each agreement. Have a separate agreement because again, the location may be different, the price range may be different. So we need all of that clarified. If you're looking for, and for commercial property, there's some different paperwork that gets involved with that as well. So just mark one, I hope that you're working with them in multiple ways. So just get another agreement signed for whatever they're looking for otherwise. General location, you can be as broad here as you want to be. In fact, I encourage you to put something like Kansas City metro area, or if you're working at, maybe in St. Joe. This kind of came up with Jody a while back. I haven't worked out the actual verbiage for that. If you're working outside of the metro area, but still within our MLS area, like St. Joe, the general St. Joe area, or name out the counties, because, if someone's looking at St. Joe, they may also be looking at Atchison. So, but you don't want to just put Lenexa, or you don't want to just put Lee Summit, because, if they're looking in Lee Summit, but then they end up buying in Greenwood, which is just outside of Lee Summit. You want to make sure that you're covered on here, and compliance will catch you on things like that. So general Kansas City metro area is absolutely fine. The approximate price range here, again, be as broad as you want to be. You can start at 0, you can start at 1. You wouldn't start at 0, but you can start at 1. And then on the top end of that, make sure that you've had the conversation. So you know what the pre-approval letter says. It kind of to follow up on what I should have said earlier about that. You know what the pre-approval letter says, but is that where the buyer really wants to be? When you do that estimated proceeds sheet for them, it also includes what an estimate of their monthly payment is going to be, or if the lender has done one for them. Make sure that you've had the conversation with your buyer. Is this where you're comfortable? Is this the monthly payment you're comfortable with, or do we want to back down on that a little bit, back that up a little bit? So make sure that you're having that conversation with them. And so you will have a cap on the approximate price range, but it's going to depend on your conversation with that buyer. If you go above that, you have to adjust that on with the change form on this. Again, compliance will absolutely get you on that. Your coach absolutely will get you on that too. If the agreement says 350 and they then do have a pre-approval letter, maybe that's where they wanted to start, but they're not finding what they're really wanting at 350, so they're going to jump up in price a little bit, but you had originally put 350 here. You have to adjust that on a change form. So that what they end up with is reflected on what our agreement said. We'll talk about the change forms on another day here. Exclusive for a period beginning, we have to have our beginning dates and our expiration dates on this. My suggestion to you is just go ahead and fill this line in, line 15, with whatever date you're doing the paperwork here. There's a pull down menu here, so just click on the date, because this is not effective until, and as this little paragraph says here, that the effective date is determined by either the date that you put in here or the date of the last signature. So you don't want to post date this, you don't want to predate this necessarily. I suggest you go ahead and put today's date in here, and then whatever date is reflected, the latest date, either here or by the signature of your buyers, will become the effective date. On line 16, we have to have an expiration date. The only people that care what that expiration date is you and the client, or the client here on this form. It can be 1 day, it can be a year. Nobody cares. What that's negotiated between you and the client. If you make it, because there are some buyers that are hesitant to lock in for a long period of time. Maybe you have a buyer that just is asking for your representation on one particular house. The real key to line 16 here is, if we go under contract with that buyer, if the buyer does make an offer that is accepted, our date on this form has to cover the closing date of that contract. And in fact, a few days past that, because things always get kind of bumped out, or um, possession may be a day or two after closing or whatever. So our agreement here has to cover at least the closing date. So if you make it for a 2-week period because they just want your representation to go see this one house, and you can name, oh, I should back up on that. That's fine. Everybody's okay with that. This is something for you to keep an eye on. Again, I make physical notes. I have an actual folder that I make physical notes on. I know. Serena's laughing at me, right? Because you use a calendar. You use a calendar for all that stuff, don't you? Yes, okay. But so whichever way works for you. But when you're initially signing this, when you're first signing this with the buyer, make sure you have that date somewhere where you keep an eye on it. And so and again, extended that with a change form. But we have to have one there. Again, so let me back up on line 11 to general location. If this buyer says, well, I just want your representation, I just want your help with this one house. If it's not this house, then I'm not going to look at any others. You can put said you can be as broad as you want to be. You can also be as narrow as you want to be in this situation. You can put the property address on that line. And if it's just going to cover them for that, that's absolutely fine. I'm not sure that I would do that. I would still probably go ahead and put the Kansas City metro area or whatever area they're looking in, because even though they say this one house, it might, there might be one down the street. Oh, hey, I didn't know that one was on the market too. Let's go look at that one. And so if you've only got one property named on here and you're showing them another property, you have to have another agreement. So, all right. So there's that. The buyer representations here, these are things that we're asking the buyer to attest to, that they're not under agreement with any other broker, that they agree to adhere to all federal and state fair housing laws and all those kinds of things. Again, I don't have time to go over all of that in detail, but some really important stuff in here in this paragraph. And then the broker obligations, this sets up our fiduciary duties, and not only our fiduciary duties, but the things that we're going to be doing because our objective here and how we prove that we have met our obligations to earn our commission here is finding them a property that meets this description that we put up here. That's why all of this is so important. And at terms that are agreeable to them. So this is not only our fiduciary duties, but all of the things that we're going to be doing to perform our job for them. Compensation of broker, paragraph 4 here. Again, there's some mechanics of filling this out. But the one that you get in your templates will have the 495 already populated there for you. So you will, because that's part of your agreement, is that you'll be paying that 495. And then the other two boxes, you have to check one of these two boxes that's here on line 79, either this one, which means that you are charging a flat fee, or you can check this box, meaning that you're charging a percentage of the contract sale price. 99.9% of the time, it's going to be the second box, but make sure that you are checking that box there and putting your percentage in there. Most of the time, I mean, we do kind of have you can expand that. Most of the time, I'm going to suggest that you have a 3%, 2.5%. You might, 3% is, we don't have an actual broker policy here, but the 3%, if we had one, would be there. You have some flexibility there. If you're showing your favorite aunt and uncle a property and you want to reduce that commission a little bit, then absolutely fine. You can do that. You can charge more than that, whatever is agreeable to the client. And this contract does say that the buyer will be paying that we may ask for that in the contract, ask the seller to pay for it, but whatever the seller doesn't pay, the buyer's responsible for. And I will say too that I've seen it asked for in contracts to ask the seller to pay a 3% buyer broker compensation plus the 495, but I have never seen a seller agree to pay that 495. So chances are your buyer's going to be paying at least that 495 there. The second part of that paragraph, if the seller's unrepresented, there are times when you might be showing a for sale by owner property, or you're going to be showing a property that is off market and the seller is not being represented by another agent. Remember, you can't represent both of them. So if you're representing the buyer, the seller may be represented by another brokerage or another agent, or unrepresented. If you are showing them a property that is not in MLS, that is off market, you're going to be doing extra work. So make sure that you have that conversation with your buyer, that if it's the seller's unrepresented, it's going to be an additional charge of that 495. I wouldn't necessarily put 3% in here, but it's completely up to you. Everything's negotiable here. But again, making sure that the buyer understands you're going to be doing the work on that for that seller. The seller may, say and think that they know what they're doing and they'll, take care of everything. They don't need your stinking help, but you still need to be on top of that situation to make sure that things are being done. And so you will be doing extra work. An extra 1% here, 1.5%, 3%, whatever is negotiable. But remember that this form does say, line 84 says, the additional compensation in that situation. So whatever you put in here is added to what you have on line 79. That will be a total that we expect from the buyer. Might ask the seller to pay it, but we expect from the buyer. Line 92, you're not going to, oh, yes, Yasmin.
Yes. So with those two fees there, do we take out the one on line 85 if the seller is going to be paying for it, or does that fee always stay on there on the contract?
Oh, good. That's a good question. It always stays on there. That's a really good question. If we
Okay.
ask for it in the contract and the seller pays it, no, because that's part of here on line 80, starting on line 87. You may seek an agreement from the seller to pay broker up to this compensation amount. Any compensation received by the seller shall be applied to the amount you own under this agreement. Now, that was a really good question. No, we don't have to change anything. If we ask for, and again, we can accept any amount up to what we have on line 85 or on line 89 if that applies also. I'm sorry, 79 or 85. Didn't scroll up quite far enough there. We can accept any amount up to that. If you are accepting amount over that, we have to have a new agreement or we have to change this agreement. We cannot accept more than what this agreement says. Somebody say something? Okay. All right. But that was a good question, Jasmine. Okay, then line 92, the retainer additional compensation addendum. That's for very specific situations. Yes, we do have that form, and it is applicable in some situations. Make sure you talk to your coach or to me before you ever check that box and decide you're going to use that form because it's for very specific situations. I didn't point out online or on page 1, but your buyer's going to be initialing every page of this agreement. So pages 1 and 2 have the initials on there. We don't here on line 101 is our protection period. I hope everybody remembers what the protection period is all about. If that buyer goes behind your back and buys a property and again, this is just after expiration time, after the expiration in our agreement here, and buys the property that you've introduced them to, that you feel met the qualifications for you to earn your commission, then we have the protection period in here, the protective period clause in here. You can put in whatever you want to in this. 180 is that protects you for 180 days after the expiration of this agreement. You can change that to more than that if you want to. You can change it to less than that if you want to. Just remember, it's going to be you that's chasing down that buyer to see if they bought another property. Brokerage isn't going to help you with that. So however long you want to chase them down. If you think that, you know what, I still do it because we do have blanks on this. I'll tell my buyer and seller what that protective period clause is all about. And I put a big 0 in there when I was doing it by hand. Can't put a big 0 in there when you're doing it online, and say to them, because I know that you wouldn't do that to me anyway, because, I'm not above installing some guilt. My mother trained me well. Right. And then again, we got to get to the listing agreement. So again, just the mechanics of this, buyers initialing all pages here. The last thing that we do here is we do have we do have the ability to put in additional terms and conditions here. Starting on line 275. Once again, if it's just for a particular address, one particular address, or maybe one or two addresses, you can identify those here. There are other times that you might want to put additional terms in there, but I'm not going to confuse you all with that right now. When you're talking with your coaches and me about the first few that you're writing here, if we see that there's a need for that, we'll talk to you about it. But you do have the ability to put in some additional terms and conditions here we're not going to talk about here today. So you sign this because even though the agreement is between the brokerage and the client, you are being named here as the designated agent. This is the one time that you have the ability to sign a contract on behalf of the brokerage. So you sign this. Don't ever send this to your buyer before you have signed it, because we don't want you to be the one that's holding up the effective date. We have all of your buyers sign here. There's not a whole lot of room to have additional buyer signatures on here and on the dot loop form, but anywhere that you can apply a signature box on here would count if you're working with 3 or more buyers or 3 or more required signators on an LLC. So you can put one down here, you can put one, there's space down here at the bottom under here. So wherever you can slip in an additional signature is perfectly acceptable if you need to. Please, please, please put in the buyer's address, phone number, and email address. Please do that. That's not only, I mean, not only is it here asking for it, but if the brokerage ever needs to contact that buyer, this is one of the few places that we would have their complete information. If you're not putting in all of it, put in, please, at least two of those, phone number and email address. The buyer address is great to have, great for us to have too, but that's also, kind of a title company thing, but that's okay. That's a whole different thing. Your signature up here, then always, always, always put in your phone number here and your email address. The additional designated agents box down here is if you want to name an additional designated agent as you are starting this agreement. This is also where we could add one later on, but this basically for you to name someone else here. If you're taking this and knowing you're going to be going out of town next week, and so you're naming one of your cohorts or a coach to help you while you're going to be out of town, this is the place to put their name as you are beginning the agreement. Okay, that's that. Then the next thing we're going to talk about here is our listing agreement. The things that are required in the seller folder here, we have the exclusive right to sell agreement. Again, there are other options, but we're not going to get into that in the class. If you're running into a situation, because Martha was there with me. Martha and I were there together here a couple of weeks ago. So there are other options. The seller does not have to sign an exclusive right to sell, but that's what protects you the best. And it really protects the seller the best also. So we're not going to get into the details of those today, but just again, for you to know that there are options in case your seller's kind of giving you a little pushback on some stuff. So the things that that are required in a seller loop is the exclusive right to sell, the seller's disclosure and condition of property disclosure. So, what's up? Somebody say something? Okay, all right. That is not for you to fill out. That is for the seller to fill out. Really quickly here, as you hand this over to the seller, again, I always hand it to them in person for them to fill out with pen and ink, because I think this is a kind of a clunky form for them to fill out on dotloop. But absolutely, if they want to do it on dotloop, that's fine too. But the only things that you can touch on this form is the seller's name. And here's where I absolutely think that you should put the seller's name as they are on the tax records here, because this is one place where I would look if I were writing an offer, see what the seller's disclosure says. So I think a lot of agents do that. The tax records may or may not be updated. The seller here, as we will talk about on the exclusive right to sell as well, should have, again, their marital status and how they are currently on title, on deed, meaning again, uh, middle initials, any suffixes, if it's an LLC, if it's a trust. We don't talk about trust buying property because that's really complicated, but a trust can sell a property. So make sure that you've had that conversation with the seller. So put in here on these lines, on lines 1 and 2, or 1 and 3 on this form, exactly how the contract should read, how the seller is on the deed. And then you can also identify the property here, and I say that this is the only place that you can touch on this form, but I do suggest that you fill this out because we want it legible. And so you're putting in the seller's identification, their names or whatever, and then the complete property address here, and the street address is just absolutely fine, but make sure that you're including everything, the house number, street number, city, state, and zip code on here. Other than that, every box, every line, every check mark on here has to be filled in without your help, without your physical help. And I know that we've had these conversations here in the brokerage before. You cannot even help an elderly or infirm uh, seller fill that out. You can't you can't check the boxes. You have if they can't do it or can't read it, I would suggest that you not even read it to them. They need to get someone else's help. You know, a family member, a neighbor, a friend, somebody else to come help them with that. The more you are involved in that, the bigger your liability is. So if it comes back incomplete to you, then absolutely you can talk to them about filling in what they left off. But please do not touch that form any more than putting the information in the header there. If the property is built before 1978, we'll also need the lead-based paint disclosure. I'm running really out of time, so we'll talk about that because those really are some of those miscellaneous forms that we talk about. So, but the lead-based paint disclosure form did both the seller's disclosure and the lead-based paint disclosure changed a little bit for us this year, but for most of you that doesn't matter because you didn't know what the old forms were like. But here our seller is making their disclosures as to whether they know whether if there's lead-based paint on the property and if there are any test results, records, reports available, because if there are, they need to pass that along to any potential buyer here. And so your seller will initial these lines and then check the appropriate box. And again, it's not up to you to check those. They will be doing it themselves. Back here on this next page is something that you have to address here. The licensee assisting the seller is informed the seller of the seller's obligations here. I haven't pulled over the new form that's got the NA here, but on line 47. But on line 45, you will, as the listing agent, you will be initialing here because you have told the seller of their obligations to make full disclosure of whether or not they know whether there's lead-based paint. 98% of the sellers have no idea if there's lead-based paint in their property, right? So it's perfectly okay for them to say that they don't know because most of them don't. And then not only will the seller sign here, but you will be signing this form also. Again, federally required form, huge, huge, huge penalty if you don't have that in the file when it's pulled for audit. And that, believe you me, that is something that they look for. Again, the requirement for the brokerage disclosure, obviously for a listing, it's going to be wherever the property is sitting. You only need the one for that. We do still need the KWKC Metro affiliated business disclosure in all of our listing agreements. I'd like for you to put the cyber protection notice in there. I do like once again, for you to do an estimated proceeds sheet for every seller as you are taking the listing. And the sheets have multiple columns. If you're using our internal one, it actually has 3 columns on it. I really like that because you've decided what price you're going to be putting the property on the market, and you put that on there, but then talk to the seller. Hey, the market's changing right now. And you know, let's put worst case here too. If we're putting the house on the market for 425, let's see what would happen if we got an offer. We didn't get an offers for that, but if we got an offer for 390 and see where the seller's net is on that. If they can't sell it for 425, if they have to have that amount in there, selling it for anything less than that, they can't go do what it is they want and need to do to move on, then you know we need to, that's best to know before you go on the market that they cannot sell for less than 425. You're going to run across situations where they have so much that they have to pay off on their current loan that we have a minimum sale price there. Really nice to know what that's going to be. The exclusive right to sell. Here again, our new version of this, we identify the seller again with full name on there. including marital status, but also how they're on title would be great to have that on here because, again, this is a contract between the brokerage and the client with you named as the designated agent. We're identifying the property here on line 4 with the street address, house number, city, state, zip code. I guess I left out street name on there, but so the property address by its common address on line 4. We also go to the tax records and pull the legal description to put on here. If it's lengthy and won't fit in here and still be legible, we have a separate form for that's called the legal description addenda that we can put that on. Most of the time, you're going to be dealing with something that's short enough, simple enough that it will all fit on here. But if it doesn't all fit on there, there's an option. But you definitely have to have the legal description of the property on this agreement. Once again, we have our period beginning, and I would go ahead and put today's date on that. I think I made the point back when we were talking about buyer agency agreements. Even if the seller's not ready to go on the market, if you are giving them advice and counsel, you need to absolutely have this dated and with an effective MLS date later on. This listing agreement is our agreement to sell the property. MLS becomes involved in there as to what date that's going to become an active listing on MLS, and we'll get to that here in just a minute. But your advice and counsel, if you're giving advice and counsel, that's an agency fiduciary duty, and you have to be under agency agreement for that. I'm sorry to have to say this to you, but if you're giving advice and counsel without having them under agency agreement, they can take that information and use it against you later with another agent, with another brokerage, going for sale by owner. So if you're giving pricing advice, if you're giving, hey, you should do this with your $10,000 budget and not do that, then have them under agency agreement. We can defer the MLS active date, but you need to be under agency agreement with them giving advice and counsel. I don't know. Maybe I've said that enough times. I don't know. It seemed like about 12 that I said that. So, all right. Hope that's enough. Have to have an expiration date on here. Again, nobody cares how long that is. It can be for 2 weeks. It can be for 2 years. That's between you and the client. But once again, this date has to cover the whatever closing date we have. Also remember that, 2 weeks isn't a whole lot of time. A couple of years ago, it was plenty of time to sell a property. In today's market, maybe not quite so much. We do have to have an actual list price here for this to be an effective contract for us. So you do have to have your list price. Of course, this can be changed at any time. If you're taking and having them sign it early, we have to have that in here. When they're ready to go on the market, maybe 30 days from now, because they were doing that stuff to the kitchen, updating the kitchen and the bathroom, then we can do a change form and change that if the market has changed, which would be probably, very likely the case in today's market. So we have to have a price here. It can be changed later on. Again, identifying the residential, whether this is residential, new construction, or land listing. And here on a paragraph or on line 21 is where we would indicate that, yes, we're under agency agreement here. We have this effective contract, but we are not going on active in MLS until a future date. And as far as I know, you can put that as far in the future as you want to. I see them on there now that are 2 and 3 months. Ahead that were listed now, but coming soon, I guess is really what the designation. I should make sure that you all understand that they're showing is coming soon in MLS. And again, I don't know that there's any length of time that would be too much in there. I mean, you probably wouldn't want to do 2 or 3 years, but months, I'm seeing in there. So this is the date that you're going to, and again, this can be changed. If you're waiting for them to update the kitchen and then the kitchen countertop is delayed delivery, and so you're not going to be ready quite when you thought, this can be changed too. Again, by a change form. You can't just come in and change this form, and we have to let MLS know about all of that too. Remember though that regardless of the status of this, because we've run across this a couple of times just recently, regardless of the status here, even if you're going on effective immediately, or if you do have that 3 week, we're not going on for another 3 weeks, you have one business day to get the MLS posted, either as active or as coming soon, whatever status. But you have one business day to get that in. There are fines that are applicable if and MLS finds out. They will find out. I guarantee you. There are fines that will be levied to you if you haven't entered that into MLS. Motivating factor for the sale of property. And I always tell my sellers, let's go ahead and check this box on line 32, regardless of what their motivation is, and just say you're leaving the area or you're downsizing or you're upsizing. All of those are, innocuous and, regardless of what the real motivation would be, because sometimes you don't want to give the real motivation for that. It might put the seller at a disadvantage if it got out to the public why they might be having to sell, and so that's information that a buyer could use against them. So but upsizing, downsizing, leaving the area, even unless they're moving right across the street from their current house, leaving the area applies to everybody, right? So or liquidating is also another one that you could use, and not really put the seller at a disadvantage. The boxes here on 36 through 38 about whether or not we can let any potential buyer or their agents know if there are other offers on the table. This is kind of a situation by situation decision to be made. Sometimes you would want to let other buyers know. I mean, we're still in certain properties and certain areas, we're still seeing multiple offers coming through. And so if an agent calls you on your listing and says, hey, my buyer's making a full price offer, and you've already got other offers in hand that are above, that, it's probably best for everyone to be able to tell that listing agent that or that buyer that. So that, if that's all they're going to do, then, don't bother, don't waste their time. But there are also those situations where we've been on the market for 3 months, we haven't had any offers, and believe you me, this is Murphy's Law, one of the Murphy's Laws of real estate. Been on the market for 3 months and suddenly you get 3 offers, right? That happens, doesn't it, Serena? Yep, sure does. So in that situation, you may not want to let those other buyers know that they are in competition. That might scare them off. And so you do want to, right? So it's kind of a situation by situation. What I suggest to sellers is, hey, seller, let's go ahead and check the box on line 38. When it says you authorize me to disclose this, that doesn't mean I have to. And so let's see, as these situations evolve, I will come talk to you as things happen before I would disclose anything, but we don't have to sign any additional paperwork for me to be able to disclose later on. So again, always discuss, you should be offering and actually talking with your seller all the time in these kinds of situations and making sure that they understand the situations that they're in. Please, on line 41, please check the box on does not. I just don't like to see love letters come through. I know agents have different feelings about that, but the love letters, the letters that buyers like to write, I'm not seeing it quite as much as we used to at one time. But buyers writing letters, telling the seller how much they love the property, and they can see themselves raising their family there. And that's right. What I just said is one of the reasons I don't like the love letters, because what I just said, those few words, is a violation of federal fair housing. If our seller would make the decision based upon, oh yeah, I want to see a family, I raised my family here, I don't care, that's not what we look at. Federal fair housing has familial status as a protected class. So if they choose a family over a single person, we've just violated federal law. And when I say we, I mean we, because we were involved in that. And we're the brokerage, the agent involved, and we have violated federal fair housing law. And if you think the lead-based paint is a huge problem, federal fair housing, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I actually had a listing agent encourage me to write
Oh,
one because
oh,
another agent wrote one and I
oh,
refused. And
good.
I brought that up just in the exact same way. I said, you know, if our offer is not strong enough and doesn't speak well enough of the situation, I was like, there's nothing I can do about that. I said,
Right.
I absolutely refuse to do that. And I said, and you should not be asking me to do that either.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, I've never personally had that happen where the agent asked for one. I mean, I've had other agents say, well, we got a couple letters, and my answer is the same thing. It's like, well, we're making a strong offer. I hope that your seller looks at the bottom line, rather than because that's what sellers should do. And that's what you should be telling your seller now that we're here on that. Again, just the mechanics, your seller's initialing every page here because I'm running out of room or running out of time here. We get down to the whether they're putting a home warranty in place at the listing or not. They have to check one of these two boxes. They agree to purchase one, and you're identifying the home warranty provider and the amount here, or they don't. We are also identifying the title company that they want to use because that's always their choice. You may have some that you suggest to them, but it's always their choice. And then also making sure that on line 175, we've listed all of the actual way that they are on the deed to the property. And there may be a third party there. That's another one of those things. This is kind of helping kind of jog the seller's memory. Oh yeah, my father's, signed this when we bought this 5 years ago. So we need to know that. Same thing all applies here on our compensation lines here, line 188 or 495. You have to check one of the boxes, either a flat fee or a percentage. Nobody really cares. That's up to you. You might have set a minimum. I should have said this on the buyer agency too. You might have a minimum, and the price at which we are talking about on these forms may not, at 3%, may not hit your minimum. That's when you would use a flat fee, and that situation comes up. So flat fee is not like anybody really cares, but it's just more typical that we're using a percentage of the sale price. Same thing here on line 194. If it's our listing and we're working with an unrepresented buyer, and that happens an awful lot here, you're going to be doing extra work. And so telling the seller here that if it's an unrepresented buyer, I'm going to be making sure that they are getting through the process properly. And that's going to be extra work on my part. So I'm going to charge you an extra, 1% or 2% or whatever. Okay. And then down here, the compensation of buyer's broker, we're also telling them that don't be surprised if you're asked in the contract to pay the buyer's broker compensation. Same thing about the protective period clause here. We have our blank here. There's a default of 180 if you want to extend that or shorten that to protect yourself. It's a little easier to prove and find on the listing side rather than on the buyer side that they went behind your back. Um, but it's still, nothing that I would typically pursue. There might be some situations. Sellers initialing every page here, getting down to, once again, the identification of you're signing on behalf of the brokerage here. Our customized form has the brokerage name here. So all sellers sign. So once again, if you have to try to find space in here to put additional sellers' names, so the trick here might be you might want to make a PDF copy of it because you might have an estate where there are 5 kids that have to sign. And so finding space for 5 signatures on here can be difficult, but making a PDF of it, you can kind of sometimes squeeze those boxes in other places. Again, identify your phone number, your email address. Please, if their only address is the listing address, that's fine, but please, please, please include their phone number and email there. All right, I'm 2 minutes over. So I'm going to stop share. I'm sorry again I'm sorry to everyone about my mix up this morning, completely my fault. So I don't see any other questions. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I do.
Also, everyone, join us at noon
There you go.
for the Monday Mastermind.
Okay.
And we'll be
And-
joined by Angel. Angel leads it. And just for any questions that you guys have.
Don't sign off yet because I'm writing everyone's name down. I don't have my sign-in sheet with me, so I want to make sure everyone gets credit for being here this morning. Alex. Oh, Alex, I will send you your certificate today. That was one of the things I'm working on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Glad you're here. Alex
Yeah,
Rudyaga,
thank
brand
you.
new agent with us. I don't know if anybody is been introduced to anybody else yet, but anyway, really excited that Alex is joining us. Brand new agent. All right. I don't see any other questions, so if anybody has anything for me, now's the time to ask.
I actually don't have a link for the Zoom for noon.
It's the same one.
It's the same link. Oh, okay, perfect. Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you.
All of the trainings will be through this one, through the
Yep.
thing.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right.
Welcome,
Okay.
Alex. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Nice to meet you.
Okay. All right. I'm let everybody go. Have a great day, and we'll see you on Wednesday for the estimated cost worksheet training. We're going to be doing that in the training room in there. That's going to be a big dang deal in there. So,
Thank
all right.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff.